The Terran diplomatic station hovering in the perpetual twilight between Kepler 442b and its crimson sun had seen better days. Not that anyone bothered to maintain the exterior anymore. When you're dealing with species that communicate through crystalline resonance, biomechanical pheromone clouds, and telepathic emanations, aesthetic appeal ranks somewhere below remembering to breathe on the priority list. The station's hull bore the scars of 3 decades worth of cultural exchange incidents, a euphemism that diplomats used when they meant that time the Zephyrian ambassador accidentally dissolved half the docking bay with excitement secretions. Inside Conference Room Theta 7, the air recycling system worked overtime to accommodate 3 radically different atmospheric requirements, creating a soup of gases that would have killed any unprotected human in roughly 14 seconds. Fortunately, the environmental suits were rated for extreme diplomatic conditions, which was bureaucratic speak for we have no idea what these aliens breathe, but the insurance covers it. Ambassador Chen Wei-Ming sat at the head of the hexagonal negotiation table, his weathered face displaying the particular strain that came from trying to broker peace between species whose evolutionary paths had diverged so dramatically that they couldn't even agree on what constituted up versus down. On his left, Shad Singh Vexthala of the crystalline hegemony chimed softly, her translucent body refracting the room's light into prismatic patterns that would have been beautiful if they weren't actually a complex series of insults directed at the representatives sitting across from her. Unit designation Braskogwil 9 of the Biomechanical Collective responded by releasing a cloud of spores that his translator helpfully announced meant your frequency is aesthetically displeasing and reminiscent of mating calls from inferior crystal formations. This, predictably, caused Shad Singh Vexthala to resonate at a pitch that made the station's hull vibrate ominously. Mindweaver Quillen, the 16th of the Psionic Commonwealth, simply projected a wave of smug satisfaction that felt like someone had filled the room with mental cotton candy laced with condescension. His telepathic commentary, roughly translated, suggested that both other species were demonstrating the intellectual capacity of particularly dim asteroids. In the corner of this diplomatic circus sat Zara Okafor, junior xenolinguist, completely absorbed in a worn paperback copy of Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. She had learned early in her career that the best way to survive these sessions was to make herself as invisible as possible while the senior diplomats engaged in what they grandly called intercultural dialogue, and what she privately termed competitive species-based stupidity. Zara had been assigned to this particular negotiation because someone in the bureaucratic hierarchy had decided that having a language specialist present would be useful. This overlooked the minor detail that she was the most junior member of the linguistics department, possessed exactly 0 diplomatic training, and had a tendency to point out logical inconsistencies at the worst possible moments. Her official role was to provide linguistic support as needed, which everyone understood to mean sit quietly and don't touch anything. The 3 species had been locked in what historians would politely call a territorial dispute for the better part of 2 centuries. The crystalline hegemony claimed the mineral-rich asteroid belt around Kepler 442 be based on their ability to sing the asteroids into more pleasing geometric configurations. The Biomechanical Collective argued that their superior processing capabilities gave them the right to convert the asteroids into useful mechanical components. The Psionic Commonwealth maintained that since they could mentally perceive the true essence of the asteroids, they obviously had first claim to them. Humans, with their typical talent for inserting themselves into situations that were none of their business, had volunteered to mediate. This was either a noble gesture of interstellar peacekeeping or a transparent attempt to gain access to the disputed resources, depending on your level of cynicism regarding human nature. Ambassador Chen cleared his throat, a sound that somehow managed to convey both diplomatic authority and barely contained exhaustion. Honored representatives, perhaps we could return to the proposal regarding shared mining quotas. The crystalline formations require harmonic cultivation, Vexthala chimed, her tone suggesting that explaining this concept to organic beings was roughly equivalent to teaching quantum mechanics to pond scum. Your mining is equivalent to musical vandalism. Braskogwil 9's mechanical components would, in what his translator indicated was derisive laughter. Efficiency protocols demand maximum resource extraction. Aesthetic considerations are irrelevant to productive output. Both approaches demonstrate a profound misunderstanding of the asteroid's fundamental nature, Quillen projected, his mental voice carrying the insufferable certainty of someone who had never been proven wrong about anything. True ownership requires psychic resonance with the material's essential properties. Zara looked up from her book just long enough to observe that they were essentially arguing about whether to paint, dismantle, or stare at the asteroids until they achieved enlightenment. She returned to Marcus Aurelius, who had considerably more sensible things to say about dealing with difficult people, even if he'd never had to negotiate with sentient crystals. The negotiations continued in this productive manner for several hours. Ambassador Chen attempted to guide the discussion toward practical compromises, such as designated zones for each species' preferred extraction methods. This suggestion was met with the diplomatic equivalent of 3 different species simultaneously explaining why he was an idiot. Harmonic cultivation cannot be constrained by arbitrary geometric boundaries. Vexthala resonated with the patience of someone explaining fire safety to a particularly slow child. Efficiency requires comprehensive resource access across all available materials, Broskogwilnine's translator announced, while his mechanical components shifted into configurations that probably meant something rude in biomechanical body language. Psychic essence transcends physical limitations, Quillen projected, managing to make enlightenment sound like a personal insult to anyone who hadn't achieved it. Zara had reached the part of the meditations dealing with the futility of trying to change other people's fundamental nature when the first real crisis erupted. Ambassador Chen, in a moment of diplomatic inspiration that would later be studied as an example of everything wrong with human conflict resolution, suggested that perhaps the 3 species could find common ground in their shared appreciation for the asteroid's inherent value. This was, as diplomatic miscalculations go, roughly equivalent to suggesting that 3 different religions might get along better if they all worshiped the same god. Vexthala's crystalline structure began resonating at frequencies that made the conference table vibrate like a tuning fork. Broskogwilnine released a cloud of what his translator tactfully called disagreement pheromones, but which smelled like someone had set fire to a chemical factory. Quillen's telepathic response felt like having someone shovel mental static directly into your brain while explaining why you were wrong about everything you'd ever thought. The harmonic integrity of crystalline formations is not subject to comparison with mechanical destruction or psychic delusion, Vexthala chimed, her tone suggesting that the ambassador had just proposed using priceless art as kindling. Biomechanical processing protocols are demonstrably superior to both inefficient crystal cultivation and theoretical psychic manipulation, Broskogwilnine's translator announced, while his mechanical components arranged themselves into what was probably an obscene gesture in 3 different languages. Neither mechanical nor crystalline comprehension approaches true understanding of essential reality, Quillen projected, his mental voice carrying the smug superiority of someone who had achieved enlightenment and wouldn't let anyone forget it. The argument escalated with the efficiency of a runaway fusion reaction. Within minutes, Vexthala was resonating at frequencies that made the station's hull emit concerning groaning sounds. Broskogwilnine had begun releasing spores that his translator sheepishly identified as chemically aggressive negotiation enhancers. Quillen's telepathic projections had devolved into what felt like someone screaming inside your head while simultaneously explaining why you deserved it. Ambassador Chen made the tactical error of standing up and calling for order, which all 3 species interpreted as a challenge to their respective authorities. The situation deteriorated with the inexorable momentum of a diplomatic avalanche. Perhaps, Chen said, his voice cracking slightly under the strain, we could take a brief recess to allow everyone to reconsider their positions. This suggestion was met with the synchronized outrage of 3 species who had suddenly found something they could agree on, the complete inadequacy of human diplomatic methodology. Vexthala's resonance shifted to what her translator helpfully identified as harmonically expressed contempt for inferior mediation attempts. Broskogwilnine released a cloud of spores that made the air shimmer with what looked like mechanical disapproval. Quillen's telepathic response felt like being lectured by an entire university faculty, while someone set your brain on fire. The backup negotiators, who had been standing ready to assist with the delicate process of interspecies diplomacy, took one look at the situation and decided that urgent business elsewhere in the galaxy required their immediate attention. Ambassador Chen watched his carefully assembled team of experts evacuate the conference room with the desperate efficiency of people fleeing a natural disaster. Which, in fairness, was a reasonably accurate description of what was happening. Chen felt his diplomatic composure, carefully maintained through 30 years of interstellar mediation, begin to crack like the station's hull under Vex Thaler's increasingly aggressive harmonics. His hands shook as he reached for his emergency medication, and his voice broke entirely as he attempted to call for another recess. It was at this moment that the station's AI, designation Artemis 7, determined that the situation had exceeded all parameters for normal diplomatic resolution. Emergency Protocol Omega 7, buried deep in the station's operational guidelines, activated for the first time in the facility's history. Attention all personnel, Artemis 7 announced through the conference room speakers, her voice carrying the particular authority that AI systems reserved for moments when humans had proven themselves spectacularly inadequate. Diplomatic crisis has exceeded normal resolution parameters. Implementing last resort contingency measures. The three alien representatives paused in their respective expressions of outrage, suddenly united in their confusion about what exactly the human AI thought she was doing. Scanning for available qualified personnel, Artemis 7 continued, her senses sweeping the conference room. Ambassador Chen W.E. Emming, incapacitated. Senior diplomatic staff, evacuated. Backup negotiators, unavailable. Alternate personnel, none available. There was a pause that felt like the entire station holding its breath. Emergency designation, Zara Okafor, junior xenolinguist, appointed as acting chief negotiator under Protocol Omega 7. Zara looked up from her book with the expression of someone who had just been informed that she was expected to perform brain surgery with a spoon. I'm sorry, what now? Ms. Okafor, Artemis 7 continued with the relentless efficiency of an AI system that had run out of better options. You are now designated as THE Station's senior diplomatic representative. Please proceed with negotiation resolution. I'm just the language girl, Zara protested, carefully marking her place in the book with a receipt from the station's commissary. I translate things. I don't negotiate things. There's a significant difference between those skill sets. Negative. Artemis 7 replied with the kind of bureaucratic certainty that had launched 1,000 wars. Your personnel file indicates fluency in all relevant alien languages, advanced degrees in xenolinguistics and comparative philosophy, and current security clearance. You are the only remaining qualified individual. The comparative philosophy was an elective, Zara pointed out, but Artemis 7 had already moved on to more pressing concerns. Representatives of the Crystalline Hegemony, Biomechanical Collective, and Psionic Commonwealth, the AI announced, please direct your attention to Ms. Okafor, who will be conducting the remainder of these negotiations. The three alien representatives turned their various sensory apparatus toward Zara with expressions that roughly translated to "You've got to be kidding." Vex Thaler's crystalline form flickered with what her translator identified as confusion mixed with disdain. Brascogwheel 9's mechanical components shifted into configurations that probably meant this is beneath our dignity in 17 different dialects. Quillen's telepathic emanations felt like someone sneezing inside your brain while simultaneously rolling their eyes. Zara closed her book, stood up, and walked to the head of the conference table with the resigned air of someone who had given up trying to understand how her life had reached this point. She looked at the three representatives, who were still projecting various forms of alien skepticism, and sighed. Right, she said, settling into Ambassador Chen's chair. So apparently I'm in charge now. This is probably going to go badly for everyone involved. The human juvenile lacks the harmonic sophistication required for meaningful discourse, Vex Thaler chimed, her tone suggesting that she was personally offended by Zara's existence. This unit questions the efficiency of communicating with obviously inadequate organic processing systems, Brascogwheel 9's translator announced, while his mechanical form shifted into what was definitely a dismissive gesture. The mental emanations from this individual suggest profound ignorance of essential truths, Quillen projected, his telepathic voice carrying the kind of intellectual snobbery that made people want to punch enlightened beings in their smug faces. Zara listened to these assessments of her qualifications, nodded thoughtfully, and opened her book back to the page she'd been reading. Marcus Aurelius says that when dealing with difficult people, it's important to remember that they are acting according to their own understanding of what's right, even when they are completely wrong about everything. She looked up at the three representatives. He also says that getting angry at stupid people is like expecting figs from olive trees. Pointless and unnecessarily frustrating. The aliens exchanged what might have been glances if any of them had possessed traditional eyes. This was not the kind of opening statement they'd expected from a human diplomat. However, Zara continued, he also points out that you can't control other people's actions, only your own responses to them. So here's what we're going to do. She stood up and walked around the table, still carrying her book. Vexthala, you want to sing the asteroids into pretty shapes. Braskogwheel 9, you want to turn them into useful things. Quillen, you want to stare at them until you achieve cosmic understanding or whatever. The problem isn't that these goals are incompatible. The problem is that you're all assuming scarcity where none exists. The asteroid belt contains finite resources, Quillen projected, his mental voice carrying the patronizing tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow student. Does it? Zara asked, flipping through her book to find a particular passage. Because from what I've read in your species' own reports, the crystalline hegemony can restructure asteroids without destroying their mass. The biomechanical collective can convert materials at the molecular level without depleting the base elements. And the psionic commonwealth doesn't actually need physical possession of anything to study its essential nature, whatever that means. She found the passage she was looking for and read aloud. Very little is needed to make a happy life. It is all within yourself, in your way of thinking. The three representatives fell silent, which in the context of ongoing interspecies negotiations was roughly equivalent to a miracle. You're not actually fighting over resources, Zara continued, settling back into her chair. You're fighting over the right to impose your particular worldview on everyone else. Which is stupid, because worldviews aren't zero-sum games. Vexthala's crystalline form flickered with what her translator tentatively identified as reconsideration protocols. The harmonic integrity of the formations would remain intact under the proposed restructuring methods. Why wouldn't it? Zara asked. You're not destroying anything, just rearranging it. Braskogwheel 9's mechanical conversion process could actually enhance the acoustic properties of crystalline structures. More surface area, more complex geometric relationships, more interesting harmonics. Braskogwheel 9's components shifted into what might have been a thoughtful configuration. Efficiency calculations did not account for harmonic enhancement variables. Crystalline resonance could improve structural integrity of mechanical constructions. Exactly, Zara said, warming to her theme. And Quillen, you'd have access to both the original asteroid compositions and their transformed states. Twice as much essential nature to contemplate, or however that works. Quillen's telepathic emanations shifted from smug superiority to what felt like cautious interest. The psychic resonance patterns would indeed be more complex in transformed materials. Multiple layers of essential truth to explore. Zara nodded encouragingly. Marcus Aurelius also says that the best revenge is not to be like your enemy. You've all been so focused on preventing the others from getting what they want that you've forgotten to ask whether you could all get what you want simultaneously. She pulled out a standard diplomatic datapad and began sketching. Vexthala, your harmonic cultivation could work in rotating cycles. Braskogwheel 9, your conversion processes could be timed to take advantage of the enhanced resonance patterns. Quillen, you get to study both the natural and modified states, plus the transition processes. The three representatives studied her rough diagram with the sort of attention usually reserved for religious texts or technical manuals. The implementation would require coordination between our respective methodologies, Vexthala observed, her tone suggesting that she was discovering the concept of cooperation for the first time. Coordination protocols would need to account for harmonic interference patterns during mechanical conversion phases, Braskogwheel 9 added, his translator indicating what might have been genuine interest. Psychic monitoring of the transformation processes would provide unprecedented insight into the nature of material essence, Quillen projected, his mental voice carrying what felt like actual enthusiasm. Zara flipped through her book to another marked passage. The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts. You've all been thinking about this as a competition when it could be a collaboration. Over the next 2 hours, something unprecedented in the history of interspecies diplomacy occurred. three radically different alien civilizations began working together to solve a mutual problem. Vexthaler's harmonic cultivation techniques could enhance the structural properties of materials before Brass-Cogwheel-9's conversion processes. The mechanical modifications could create new crystalline formations for Vexthaler to work with. Quillen's psychic studies could provide insights that improved both other species' methodologies. They discovered that crystalline resonance could guide mechanical precision, that mechanical modifications could create new harmonics, and that psychic analysis could optimize both processes. What had seemed like incompatible worldviews turned out to be complementary approaches to the same underlying goals. The efficiency gains from harmonic-guided conversion would exceed individual operational parameters Brass-Cogwheel-9 calculated, his mechanical components arranging themselves into what his translator indicated was pleased surprise. The musical complexity of mechanically enhanced crystalline structures would represent a new form of aesthetic expression. Vexthaler resonated, her form brightening with what appeared to be artistic excitement. The psychic resonance patterns from cooperative transformation would provide insights into the fundamental nature of collaborative consciousness, Quillen projected, his mental voice carrying what felt like genuine wonder. Zara looked up from her book, where she'd been reading about the importance of finding common ground with difficult people. So we have a deal. The three representatives looked at each other, then at her, then at the rough sketches she'd made of their cooperative arrangement. The crystalline hegemony finds these terms acceptable, Vexthaler chimed, her translator adding a note about this being the first time in recorded history that her species had agreed to share resources with non-crystalline entities. The biomechanical collective calculates positive efficiency outcomes from this arrangement, Brass-Cogwheel-9 announced, while his components shifted into configurations that his translator indicated meant successful negotiation protocols achieved. The psionic commonwealth perceives the essential correctness of this collaborative approach, Quillen projected, his mental emanations feeling like someone had just understood something important about the nature of reality. Zara marked her place in her book and stood up. Excellent. Artemis 7. Please prepare the standard cooperation agreements with modifications for species-specific implementation requirements. Acknowledged, the AI responded, and if an artificial intelligence could sound impressed, Artemis 7 managed it. Agreement protocols initiating. Estimated completion time, 4 hours. Ambassador Chen, who had recovered enough to witness the final stages of the negotiation, stared at Zara with the expression of someone who had just watched a junior staff member accidentally discover the unified field theory. How? He asked, his voice still shaky from his earlier breakdown. Zara held up her book. Marcus Aurelius. Turns out ancient philosophy is pretty good preparation for dealing with impossible people. Who knew? She walked back to her corner, settled into her chair, and opened the book to her marked page. The three alien representatives were deep in discussion about implementation schedules and collaborative protocols, their earlier antagonism replaced by what appeared to be genuine enthusiasm for their joint project. Ambassador Chen approached her with the cautious respect usually reserved for people who had just performed minor miracles. Zara, that was extraordinary. How did you know that would work? She looked up from her reading. I didn't. But Marcus Aurelius says that when you can't control external circumstances, you might as well try responding with reason instead of emotion. Seemed worth a shot. Would you consider a transfer to the Diplomatic Corps? Chen asked. We could use someone with your approach to conflict resolution. Zara considered this offer while watching Vexthaler demonstrate harmonic resonance patterns to Brass-Cogwheel-9, who was calculating how to incorporate them into his mechanical designs, while Quillen projected commentary about the psychic implications of their collaboration. Thanks, but no, she said finally. I like being the language girl. Less responsibility, more time to read. She returned to her book, leaving Ambassador Chen to contemplate the fact that the most successful diplomatic breakthrough in his career had been achieved by someone whose primary qualification was an ability to mind her own business until circumstances forced her to do otherwise. The Terran diplomatic station continued its orbit around Kepler 442b, its hull still bearing the scars of previous diplomatic incidents, but now also hosting the first successful three-way interspecies cooperation agreement in galactic history. In Conference Room Theta 7, Representatives of three radically different civilizations worked together to plan their shared future, guided by insights from a 2,000-year-old human philosopher and implemented by someone who had never wanted to be a diplomat in the first place. And in the corner, Zara Okafor sat quietly reading, having learned that sometimes the best way to solve impossible problems was to stop treating them as impossible and start treating them as puzzles that hadn't been properly understood yet. Marcus Aurelius, she reflected, would have approved of the whole situation, especially the part where everyone involved had learned something about the value of examining their assumptions. Though he probably would have been amused by the irony that his meditations on dealing with difficult people had turned out to be applicable to species that hadn't even been discovered when he wrote them. Some things, apparently, were universal, including the tendency of intelligent beings to make simple problems complicated and the occasional need for someone to point out when they were being unnecessarily stupid about it. The emergency alarm that had designated her as the backup plan had long since fallen silent, but Zara suspected that Artemis 7 would be updating the station's emergency protocols to include consult the person reading in the corner as a legitimate crisis management strategy. After all, it had worked better than anything else they tried.